First tonight, with just 50 days left in office, President Biden has pardoned his son, Hunter, despite previously saying he would not give him clemency. Hunter Biden was convicted earlier this year of illegally buying a gun and lying about his drug abuse, as well as tax evasion. In a statement, President Biden said he was pardoning his son now because he believed the charges were politically motivated. By wiping out Hunter Biden's federal convictions, the president has spared his son any possible prison sentence.
President Joe Biden has pardoned his son Hunter following convictions on tax and gun charges. This is an announcement that wipes the slate clean and ensures that Hunter Biden will not be incarcerated as he prepares for sentencing. What's really notable here is this is an action that the White House had repeatedly said over the course of many weeks that the president did not intend to take. However, in a statement that he has issued, President Biden has said that in looking at the facts of the case, he had concluded that Hunter Biden was singled out in, quote, a miscarriage of justice and was prosecuted because he was the president's son. And so he has determined that the cases were unfair and that Hunter Biden deserved credit for having turned his life around in the years since the conduct occurred. And so it's really notable that he's taking this action now to really help his son, benefit his son, and undo two separate criminal cases that have really shattered his son for the last several years. In this case, the pardons came not only in the final weeks of President Biden's tenure, but also in the days before Hunter Biden was to be sentenced. You'll remember he was convicted in a gun case in Delaware and pleaded guilty in a separate tax case in California. He was set to learn his fate, and prosecutors were set to, try to seek to have a sentence imposed on him. And so this pardon really averts that punishment, ensures that he won't be faced with an incarceration. And so the pardon does seem designed to preempt that next step in the criminal process. But it is also the case that it is not the first time that a president has deployed his pardon power to benefit those around him. You'll remember, of course, that in December 2020, then President Donald Trump pardoned the father of his son-in-law. So he pardoned Charles Kushner, whose son Jared is married to Trump's daughter Ivanka. And that raised attention. He also pardoned multiple close allies who were convicted in Special Counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. So there is a precedent for presidents taking pardon power to benefit, family members, people close to them. But there's no question that in doing this, President Biden is probably setting himself up for questions in the days ahead.
That's Eric Tucker, who reports for the Associated Press. Meanwhile, leading U.S. Republicans and some Democrats have lambasted President Biden for pardoning his son after he'd previously insisted that he wouldn't do so. Donald Trump, who will be back in the White House next month, called it an abuse and a miscarriage of justice. One congressman said it was a brazen display of nepotism. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line by the U.S. Republican strategist, Greg Swenson. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Greg. So Joe Biden has done something he promised not to do. He has pardoned his son Hunter for filing fraudulent tax reforms and failing to pay taxes, for which he could have gone to jail, other problems as well. What's your reaction to the fact that President Biden has gone back on his word?
Yeah, well, it wouldn't be the first time, Charles. It's not a real surprise to me or a shock at all. I think Joe Biden has been basically corrupt his entire career, and especially while he was vice president 10 years ago. So I think in this case, it shouldn't shock anybody. It's not just that he pardoned Hunter. It was the implicit admission of guilt of the Biden family cartel, if you want to call it that, going back to the days when Joe Biden was vice president. So it shouldn't surprise anybody. I think, I knew this was coming. He had to do it before the administration changes in January. And given his health and his sort of cognitive challenges, I think it was wise for him to do it now and not wait for some accident to happen and then, miss his opportunity. So no real surprise here, Charles.
I mean, Greg, he says, President Biden says he felt he had to do it because basically the charges against Hunter Biden were politically motivated and that Hunter had faced unrelenting attack and what he called selective prosecution because his name was Biden.
Yeah, look, just like his constant, comments that he would not pardon, that is a complete and utter lie. And so, obviously Hunter received real sweetheart treatment from justice. They let the statute of limitations expire on his most significant crimes, which occurred in 2014 and 15. And so to say that is really kind of absurd. And I also would remind the audience that, the gun charge, okay, you can maybe make that argument that most people that falsify applications or gun application forms, aren't prosecuted for it, maybe a slap on the wrist. But in fact, he did throw the gun in a garbage can across the street from a school. But more importantly, on the tax evasion charges, that's not something that people treat, that the IRS treats lightly. In Hunter Biden's case, that was just standard operating. It had nothing to do with his last name. There were 2,500 criminal indictments on tax evasion in 2022. 90% plus were convicted. So that they can't really make that argument. It's just not true.
And I mean, not only is President Biden pardoning Hunter for the crimes for which he's already been convicted, he appears to be taking preemptive action in case Donald Trump wants to investigate other things that Hunter might have been doing. I understand this pardon covers that period because it dates from the 1st of January 2014 to the 1st of December 2024.
That's right. They covered everything. So there's no way that now you won't see anything about Joe Biden and 10% for the big guy or any of the money that was passed down to the other Biden family members, including Joe. And so this was a way to, again, I think it's an implicit admission of guilt. It predates even Hunter's discharge from the Navy for failing a drug test. He tested positive for cocaine. This is back before he was an alleged, drug addict or talking. He seems to blame both Hunter and Joe, blame everything he's ever done on his addictions. But he was laundering money and making arrangements with Ukraine, with Romania, with Russia, with China, all financial obligations on those countries or companies in those countries to pay him while he was selling influence. And that's all before he was, experienced this drug. I mean, this isn't really as much about the gun charge and his problems with drug addiction. This is about foreign influence peddling and money laundering. And there's bank records to prove it. So it's not like this is some speculation or right-wing conspiracy theory. So it's really a sad day for the Biden family. You can argue that he did the fatherly thing in protecting his son. I guess there's some nobility to that, but it proves that Biden is corrupt and Biden is a really poor liar.
Well, I mean, people could make the same arguments about Donald Trump because, I mean, unsurprisingly, we had Donald Trump sort of reacting by saying that this is rank hypocrisy. But we do recall in 2020 that Donald Trump pardoned the father of his son-in-law, Charles Kushner, and a whole slew of other people. And it's interesting that some of Mr. Trump's allies are also saying that all this shows how politicized and weaponized the Justice Department has become.
Yeah, and I think they have a point, Charles. Look, there's subjectivity to these presidential pardons, and they're usually controversial. Bill Clinton pardoned his brother, for example. But in most cases, it's for people that either have served time already, like Jared Kushner's father, or they felt that there was some injustice in the prosecution. But you can't really make that argument about Hunter. He's not even been sentenced yet. And he's also obviously, corrupted himself and the family in all of this influence peddling. And some of the real crimes here, like not registering as a foreign agent, like influence peddling, money laundering, they let those statutes of limitations expire. And so he's not even, he was never charged for any of the crimes that occurred in 14 and 15, again, because the statutes expired. So, you know, there's not a lot of argument here. I think even you're seeing people on the left express, you know, a couple of Democrat congressmen, for example, express their disappointment in this. And again, it's not just letting him off for one specific crime, notably the gun crime. It's a 10-year window of corruption. And it's basically not just on Hunter. This is about Joe and his brother James and the entire family.
Well, I mean, Greg, you know, you and I have had on-air chats for many years, and I know you to be quite objective, even though you're obviously a Republican strategist. I mean, now we've got both sides, Biden and Trump, saying, if I'm being prosecuted, it's a political witch hunt, but if you're being prosecuted, then that's the justice system working the way it ought to. How much of a problem is that?
It is a problem, Charles, and it's a great question and a great point. And you know, I try to be objective on these things, but what we've had in the last 4 years, let's face it, it's the Biden Justice Department. So they did an incredible job of protecting Hunter until it just got to be so ridiculous. You know, the sweetheart deal he received originally on the gun charge, and they waived off the tax charges. So, you know, that was just one bit too far for, you know, some of the judges in the system to tolerate. But, you know, you had 4 years of protecting Hunter until it got, you know, it just became impossible to continue that. But also, you know, there was weaponization and going after Trump, you know, elevating a misdemeanor in New York to a felony. You know, the list is long. So what I hope happens is that they come in and they clean up justice and they get it back to the point where, yes, no one is above the law, but it's fair and it's not political, it's not partisan. So I hope that can happen with the new administration.
And I mean, do you expect that Mr. Trump and his Republican allies will try to raise investigations into all manner of allegations against his political opponents and enemies when he comes into office?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it will be against political enemies. It will be against people that broke the law in a flagrant way. So if there was, you know, attempts, for example, by the FBI to censor information, you know, they had the Hunter Biden laptop for a year. They had verified and validated it, and yet they censored that information to protect Joe Biden when he was the candidate in 2020. You know, there are occasions where there was some real law breaking by people in the justice system, FBI, CIA. It's not political enemies. It just needs to be, you know, I think the wrongdoing has to be stopped. And so I don't think he'll go after political enemies. Remember, he didn't go after Hillary Clinton, even though she, you know, was pretty blatantly violating, you know, the email restrictions for when she was Secretary of State, you know, the famous Hillary Clinton emails, and she destroyed a couple of laptops. And, you know, and he just let it go. I think it's better to do that. It's better to, you know, you don't want to have that impression that you're going after your political opponents or enemies. But unfortunately, we've seen that in the last 4 years. None of those indictments ended up working. And I think it's good that we can all bury it now and hope that it never happens again.
And those are very sound points indeed. I want to thank you, Greg, for taking the time to talk to us. Greg Swenson is a U.S. Republican strategist who was talking to me on the line there from London, I believe.